I really appreciate the relationship that I've got to have and to walk into a room like this where I have so many friends. At least in my last job, I was really good about walking into rooms where people like to throw things at you and yell at you. And it's great in this new role at IBHS. They say nice things to you. They don't complain about their flood maps. They don't say mean things about their insurance rates. It's a great thing. I came in about 6 months ago from that prior role, and as I walked into IBHS, this relationship with Flash has really been a focus of mine because of the symmetry that we have and the complementary nature that is there and what it means to continue to build on it. And it happens in a year where we keep seeing the impact of disasters. And we keep seeing them over and over and over again. A couple months ago, I'm in New Bern, North Carolina. We often think about Florence in terms of the flooding event, which it truly was. But in New Bern, you actually saw three things come together. You saw a surge event, a wind event, and a flooding event all play out in one town. It was striking as you drove through, you could actually go neighborhood to neighborhood, and by the debris pile, you could figure out which of the three came their way. The wind debris are piles of wood and brush. The flood debris are couches and mattresses. And you can see this as you go down those roads. Last year, as Harvey hit Houston, an opportunity on many occasions to be down there. And I had a conversation with one lady, her name was Esther. It was her third flooding event in 3 years. She had developed an expertise that is very rare. She had become an expert in filing flood insurance claims. 3 years in a row. These places by which Mother Nature doesn't discriminate. And so I think in front of all of us, there's this business problem. Maybe better said for this room, there's this societal problem where we keep seeing disruption, displacement, and drivers of economic loss. Our risks, no matter what someone might tell you, just aren't under control. There's this long list of places where we go. It's Moore, Oklahoma, in tornadoes. It's the community of Montecito, California, that was ravaged by not just fires, but mudslides. We look at the impacts of both Matthew and Florence in North Carolina. Just most immediately, Michael. But if you'll allow me a quick moment on a personal front, this piece about disruption and displacement, we've got to always understand the real people on the other end of it. So yesterday, the hometown that my parents and brother live in Paradise, California, was evacuated. And so this morning, as I'm putting myself in the headspace to walk into this room, I'm texting with my mom while it is still dark about how to get prescription medications lined up, which they'll need tomorrow. And Roy, don't you know something about insurance? I know I've got a policy. Who do I call? While it's hopeful that they have the insurance cover in ways by which their personal financial losses will be able to be addressed, the displacement of my family is something you cannot compensate for. We look at these pieces, and so these personal pieces that play out for each one of us find ways to become compelling, and it's in many ways what was so attractive to me to come to IBHS. This attraction that I have, this unique opportunity where the insurance industry not only contributes but leads in big places of the resilience movement. If you get bored in the next 20 minutes, you can go to disastersafety.org and you can watch videos of us crash testing buildings. Sometimes that's better than listening to me. But we look at these places and we look at the opportunity that an organization like IBHS has. But we got to understand that it requires for us to address these outcomes, to change the impact of displacement, of disruption, and those drivers of financial loss require all the players of the ecosystem to come together, not just one industry. This room that has been convened by Flash is one of the rare places where the ecosystem comes and coalesces together. So, how do we do it? You all have been talking about this for the last day and a half. I want to try to put a fine point on a few pieces of it. We're not building strong enough. Full stop, we're not building strong enough. So if we've made progress over the last few years, let me tell you this. We're no longer trying to convince people there's a problem. Okay, congratulations, folks. We've got beyond the problem, but whether or not we can get people to actually do something about it is what's in front of us right now. In 2017 and 18, we saw these pieces play out, where we saw that the stronger building techniques are effective. We have ways to address wind mitigation in defensible space. To be really straightforward, as we understand that that array from severe events to extreme, on the severe side, we have shown that we do have the ability to defend against those events. And we got good momentum in a surround sound. Yet, the pain of these events remains palpable. We had a team who spent time just a couple weeks back across Panama City and Port St. Joe and Mexico Beach. And you look at the impact that this has, yet for most folks, these pictures, which were served up and shown on TV to them, were a million miles away. It wasn't going to impact them. They were confident of it. If 2017 made the case for resilience, 2018 really was that exclamation point. So while weather and climate are a long game, we are looking just at these last 2 years, and no one can reasonably tell you that these risks are under control. Okay, so if all that's playing, some may want to jumble and mangle the vocabulary to avoid trigger words. Yet no one these days is denying the effect. What I can tell you is political ideology cannot explain away the disruption. Political speeches will not assuage the displacement. And no matter how much government money we shower down after disasters, the financial loss does not go away. So what do we do about it? Well, I think the opportunity in front of this room is how do we find more approaches that are accessible and affordable to people who are going to have these impacts? It requires climatology and engineering and actuarial tables to make it all the way to real people. So we've been on a journey as a resilience community. By luck, by providence, or maybe by grand design, we've been preparing for this. So I can show you this timeline that is here. I want to zoom in on just 3 key elements of this. 2002, when the Florida Building Code was adopted post-Andrew. You look in 2012, when Smart Home Alabama blossomed into Smart Home America, and Alabama adopted its coastal code supplement, and a Texas collaborative was created. And in 2018, we saw the Disaster Recovery Reform Act passed. I won't steal Dan's thunder as he goes into those pieces, but the kinds of actions we've been asking and demanding that the federal partners bring to the table, they've done. That will play out here in the months to come. The question is, what will we do in communities with those kind of resources brought to bear? So I show you this timeline, and I want to give you a little parenthetical for a moment, because medical researchers have found that from the time that a best practice, that best practice treatment is found until it becomes a standard practice, takes on average 17 years. It seems to me that we're right on schedule to move this into the mainstream. So what does that look like? We need to find more homeowners like Paul Jackson.
If you're going to build, you need to go through the Fortified program. Those guys have been doing this for a long time, and they know what works and what doesn't work. Follow their lead, take a couple of extra dollars, a little bit of time to take pictures and learn about the program. After seeing the devastation, there's no way I would not build a fortified house. The Fortified program is a good portion of why this house is still standing.
Paul Jackson lives in Mexico Beach. He has a fortified gold designated home. And while there was some storm surge that met the bottom of his first floor, and there was some flying debris that came moving through, there's a great 2x4 that is lodged in the side of his structure. There was no structural damage. When you walk through his home, the first floor looks like it experienced a flood, and the second floor looks like it did midsummer. Everything is still in its place. Most of you know Fortified, and many of you are even advocates for it. As this has marched along, I am very proud to say that this month, the 10,000th designation of a fortified structure was issued. Folks, that is real progress. The partnership that we've had with people in this room, particularly those in Alabama, get much of the credit for that. That fortified piece looks across 3 levels, for those of you who don't know it, looks at the roof, looks at the openings, and finally looks at how that envelope comes together. But the challenge that's been in front of IBHS over this bit of time is, how do we get folks to do something about it, not just when we're looking at new structures, but at the point of retrofit? How do we make this more accessible, and how do we make this more affordable? On average, that additional amount to fortify a roof is $1,000. On average, the amount to fortify that whole structure when you're doing new construction can only be 3 or 4%. So we're looking at ways to how do we get to the essence, the critical elements of it, and even in some places simplifying that fortified roof process so that more folks can get the level of protection that they need. It looks like partnerships that we have, like the North Carolina Wind Pool, NCIUA, who has an endorsement by which those that were impacted by Florence directly on the coast, when they have their roofs repaired, will actually be upgraded to a fortified roof. We really think this piece is ready for expansion. So 2 quick videos I'm going to show you here, because it can't just be the government, it's got to be where the marketplace meets it here. So I'm going to introduce you first to one of the large volume builders there in Baldwin County, Alabama, followed by a great resilience champion and friend of ours, Lanny Smith.
In our marketplace, the program has been so well received that basically it's transitioned to now where people expect that program in the new home, in new homes in our area. And it's really fun to watch how it's transitioned from, a few people asking for it to the marketplace demanding it.
Resilience, in my opinion, has to take place at a community level. If it's voluntary, you may have part of your community that's fortified, part of it that's not. And after a natural disaster, your community is never whole again until your people are back.
These are folks that are taking the action on the front side. We've got to get more of that playing, because while regrettable, what I've seen over and over again is usually the driver to get someone to think about resilience is A, they've been devastated and therefore going through rebuilding, or B, they're in one of the adjacent communities that we see to that disaster and they just feel lucky. It's that moment by which they want to go do something now because they feel they had so much that they may have lost. So this next piece is from someone who has that perspective, directly hit by Michael, and figuring out how to put it back together again.
Anything I can do to make it stronger, I would do. Yeah, absolutely. Because I've seen what happened to so many of the houses. And if there's any way to build to prevent that kind of damage, yeah, you'd be crazy not to do it.
So we sit in this place where we know how to reach homeowners. We have examples of community leaders who've embraced resilience. We've seen the marketplace even reward this there along the Gulf Coast. So where do we go? If we've been making the case, if we've got the tools available to us, how do we begin to push forward in a way by which this becomes normal, not simply extraordinary? 3 simple things. But before I do, it's interesting. At times, this stuff gets wrapped up in conversations about climate. And those climate discussions can become pretty rarefied, where people don't quite know what to do. Because folks, 1.5 to 2 degrees centigrade is significant. It really is. But if you're a homeowner, what in the world are you supposed to do about that? We keep making the case about these big problems. And there are things that the federal government must do in that space, as well as states and a very small handful of metro centers and cities that may be able to lean in on that climate mitigation front. But on the adaptation side, we have to find ways to begin to make this personal. The ocean is warming and rising, but people don't know what to do about it. And so we've got to speak to that point of self-interest. So one way is price, because price is one of the most effective ways to communicate risk. But we've got to find ways to move beyond a point, because today so many individuals feel paralyzed. We seem intent on building in the places where the water used to be and where it used to drain harmlessly. We are placing more and more homes right up next to that interface where they become tender for a fire. And even the best advances in defensible space will fall apart when you are showered with wildfire embers, when they come your way. I am convinced that if we cannot activate individual homeowners and community leaders, the next housing bubble is actually a disaster bubble. Whether it's from flood, fire, or tornado. We'll see what the reports look like out of Paradise, California when they can do flyovers today, but the overnight reports in the EOC say that as much as 95% of the town may have been impacted by the fire. Well, if you're a town of 26,000 like Paradise, California, and 95% of your town is impacted, you don't have a town. You don't come back. how do we move this farther down the road? So we've got to make it tangible. We've got to show people what the affordable elements are that they can do. We've got to turn to community leaders, because resilience at its best really has been led locally. Building codes have been an essential part of that. And rightfully, the focus of building codes has been on life safety. But I've got a what if for you. What if the ability to return to a structurally sound home was part of the building code? What if we looked at things in that way to build upon what has become a convincing and effective tool in communities on life safety, and began to look at in terms of the structure and its ability to withstand? So it requires more attention on the behavioral side of the equation and the choice architecture that people make. We've got to find ways to overcome the fact that homeowners really have accepted a very, very low threshold of risk. 98% of the counties in America have experienced flooding in the last decade. Yet look at how things have played in terms of those who have flood insurance. You can go, well, they need to understand their risk better, and you can poke at flood maps. I live in a great state now, North Carolina. It's got some of the best descriptions of flood risk you can see anywhere in the country. When Matthew came through, 70% of the damaged structures were in the designated high hazard zone for flooding. Percent of them with insurance, 5%. 5%. When Florence came through that same area again, a little bit broader swath, the insured levels are still sitting in the single digits. But I want to push this room just a bit, because you all work these issues of resilience day in and day out, and we listen to these stats and go, I just don't understand why people won't do the right thing. Well, it might be for the same reasons why we all know that the studies show that if you go the speed limit, it limits accidents and fatalities. I won't ask you to raise your hands about how many who have a default of going 5, 7, or 10 miles an hour over it. The statistics are clear. The studies are in hand. We've told people about it. What about credit card debt? The statistics are clear in terms of the impact of that and how it drains and actually erodes a family's ability to succeed even into future generations. Yet, 38% of Americans hold over consumer debt month to month. The data's clear about retirements. And what does it mean to put money into a retirement savings account? We don't need any more studies to tell us the importance of that. Yet, less than 55% of Americans put anything into a retirement account each year. I venture to say, where I'm talking about speeding, where I'm talking about credit card debt, or I'm talking about contributions into retirement accounts, and I won't ask for a raise of hands, those national statistics are true in this room. Why don't people do the right thing about disasters? Well, ask yourself, why aren't you taking those choices related to how you drive, how you spend, and how you save? We've got to find ways to get inside that behavioral change. In just the same way that we need to be challenged on the financial side, we've got to be able to challenge and bring things alive for homeowners and renters. We've got to get at that consumer behavior. I think one of the elements is about incentives. I love what we've been able to see happen with the North Carolina wind pool and how that work has played out, by which we will see more people be able to rebuild better. We've got to find more ways into the industry, whether that's about roofers or that's about builders of homes, how we deal with those manufacturing pieces. But we've got to make this to the point by which they feel they can do something about it. Because if the problem feels too large, if the problem feels too big, what Americans do is shut down and cover their head. In just the way that some of you in this room shut down and cover yours. We go after that behavioral change. We find financial mechanisms. And for us at IBHS, we're very focused on how we engage that supply chain. So as we wrap up, if the need is so clear, and we know how to fortify the homes, we know the actions that need to take, how then do we get to this point of these elements by which real people care as much about what's in their walls as they do about what is hanging on those walls? How do we cross those bridges? It requires us to make it available, accessible, affordable, and take the pieces that we know that work. And rather than grandstand about them, we have to relentlessly find ways to package, convince, and advance these pieces so that we can ensure that people will be able to withstand those severe events and then rely on the backstop for the extremes. Thanks.